Hello there, my dears. Pull up a chair, get comfortable. My name is Clara, and I've seen more sunrises and sunsets than I can count. 104 years of them, to be exact. And let me tell you, some stories just need to be told before you meet your maker. Stay with me until the end, because what my mother did, or rather didn't do, and the secrets I uncovered, well, it's enough to make your hair curl. You won't believe how this story truly ends. And if you like stories that dig deep into the human heart, the kind that could happen to anyone, well, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, because I've got a lifetime of tales, and this is just one of them. Now, where was I? Yes, 104 years. Most folks my age are either pushing up daisies or haven't got enough marbles left to tell you their own name. But me? My body might be creaky as an old porch swing, but my mind, Lord have mercy, my mind remembers it all. Sometimes I wish it didn't, especially the early years. You see, the title of this here story, My Father Abused Me and My Mother, Did Nothing? Well, that ain't just some fancy headline to grab your attention. That was my life. My cross to bear for longer than I care to admit. Back in my day, things were different. Children were to be seen and not heard, especially girls. And fathers? Well, they were kings of their castles. Their word was law. My father, Arthur, he took that to a whole other level. He wasn't just a king, he was a tyrant. A man with a temper quicker than a rattlesnake and a heavy hand to match. I can still feel the sting of it on my cheek, the way his eyes would go cold and hard right before he'd lash out. It wasn't just the physical, mind you. Oh no, his words could cut deeper than any switch. He'd call me useless, stupid, a burden. He had a way of making a little girl feel smaller than a dust mite. And my mother, Eleanor? Bless her heart. Or perhaps I shouldn't say that. She was a wisp of a woman, pale and quiet, always seemed to be tiptoeing around trying to make herself invisible. She saw it. She heard it. The slammed doors, the shouting, my muffled cries at night. And what did she do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. She'd just lower her eyes, her lips pressed into a thin, white line, and scurry off to the kitchen or the sewing room, pretending like the world wasn't caving in around her only child. How could she? That's the question that haunted me for decades, gnawed at me like a rat in the walls. Was she scared of him too? Or did she just not care? That thought, that maybe my own mother didn't care if I lived or died, that was a pain, all its own. I remember one time I must have been about 8. I'd spilled a glass of milk at the dinner table. A simple accident. But Father, he flew into a rage. Grabbed my arm so tight I thought the bones would snap. He dragged me to my room, and the things he said, the way he... Well, I won't dirty your ears with all the details, but I screamed for my mother. I screamed until my throat was raw, and when he finally left, slamming the door so hard the little picture on my wall fell and shattered, I lay there crying, waiting for her to come, to hold me, to say something, anything. But the only sound was her quiet footsteps walking away from my door. That night, something inside me broke, or maybe something inside me started to harden, like a seed getting ready for a long, cold winter. Years went by like that, a dreary, fearful procession of days. School was my only escape, a place where I could almost pretend to be a normal girl. But even there, the shadows followed me. I was jumpy, quiet, always looking over my shoulder. The other children, they sensed it. They didn't understand, of course. How could they? Their homes were havens. Mine was a war zone. I started planning my escape when I was about 15. It wasn't some grand, dramatic thing. Just a slow, secret squirreling away of pennies I earned doing odd mending jobs for neighbors, a little bit of bread or cheese filched from the pantry when no one was looking. My plan was simple. Wait for my 16th birthday, then just disappear. Walk until I couldn't walk anymore. Find some town where no one knew Arthur or Eleanor Pendleton and start over. What else could I do? Stay and let him break me completely? Let her silence be the soundtrack to my misery? I swore on my grave I wouldn't let that happen. The night before my 16th birthday, I had my little bundle packed, a change of clothes, my few hoarded coins, a stale biscuit. My heart was pounding like a wild bird trapped in a cage. The house was dark, quiet. Father was snoring in his room, a sound that usually filled me with dread, but tonight it was the sound of opportunity. Mother, I assumed, was asleep beside him, oblivious or uncaring, as always. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the last straw. I'm finally doing it. I crept down the stairs, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot in the silence. I reached the back door, my hand trembling as I reached for the latch. Freedom was just inches away. And then I heard it. A sound from my parents' room, not Father's snores. It was a small sound, almost like a kitten mewling. I froze. My blood ran cold. What in tarnation was that? I tiptoed closer, my ear pressed to their door. And then I heard it again, clearer this time. It was my mother. She was crying, softly, desperately, as if her heart was breaking into a million pieces. I'd never heard her cry like that before. Not for me, not for anything. And then I heard her whisper something that made every hair on my body stand on end. She whispered, "He can't know. He must never know the truth about her." Her? Who was her? Me? What truth couldn't he know about me? My mind reeled. For a second, just a second, I almost turned the knob, almost burst in there demanding answers. But the fear, decades of it, held me back. And a new, confusing feeling. A flicker of pity for this weeping woman. What was her secret? What was my secret? It was a puzzle I couldn't solve, not then. But you don't believe what happened next. I knew deep in my gut that my escape had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. Lord have mercy. Standing there outside their door, hearing my mother weep those cryptic words, it threw me for a loop, I tell you. He can't know the truth about her. Who was her? My first thought, of course, was me. What truth about me was so terrible that my father, the man who already treated me like dirt, couldn't know it? It made no sense. But that sound of her crying, it wasn't the sound of a cold, unfeeling woman. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated despair. It almost made me hesitate. Almost. But then I remembered all those years, all those beatings, all that silence. Pity or no pity, I had to save myself. So I turned from that door, the mystery of her words burning in my mind, and I slipped out into the pre-dawn chill. I didn't run, not at first. I walked, fast and steady, putting as much distance between me and that house of horrors as I could before the sun came up. Every shadow seemed to hold my father's silhouette. Every rustle of leaves sounded like his footsteps. But I kept going. For days, I walked, sleeping in haylofts or under bridges when I had to, eating what little I had and then relying on the kindness of strangers. And let me tell you, back in those days, there was still a good bit of kindness to be found, even for a runaway girl with haunted eyes. I ended up in a town called Havenwood, a good 100 miles from where I grew up. Seemed like a good omen, the name. I found work as a scullery maid in a boarding house, scrubbing floors and washing dishes till my hands were raw. It was hard work, honest work, and for the first time in my life, no one was screaming at me. No one was raising a hand. The landlady, Mrs. Gable, was a stern but fair woman. She saw something in me, I reckon. Maybe the desperation. Maybe the resilience. She gave me a small attic room and 3 square meals a day. It felt like a palace. Changed my name, too. Clara Pendleton died on that road somewhere. I became Lily Mae Thompson. Lily, because it sounded fresh and new, like a spring flower pushing through hard ground. May, just because I liked the sound of it. Thompson, well, that was the name on a feed store sign I passed. Simple as that. And Lily Mae, she started to build a life. A quiet life. I kept to myself mostly, scared of getting too close to anyone, scared they'd find out where I came from, who I really was. The fear of my father finding me was a constant shadow. Every time a tall, angry-looking man walked into the Borden house, my heart would leap into my throat. Years passed. Slowly, the sharp edges of my memories began to dull, though they never disappeared completely. I learned to bake from Mrs. Gable, and turned out I had a knack for it. My pies and cakes became quite famous in Havenwood. Eventually, I saved enough to rent a tiny storefront and open my own little bakery. Lily Mae's Sweets and Treats. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I even got married. A good, quiet man named Thomas, a carpenter. He was gentle and kind, the exact opposite of my father. We never had children. I suppose a part of me was too scared, too broken, to bring another soul into a world that could be so cruel. Thomas, bless his soul, he never pushed. He understood in his quiet way that I carried wounds he couldn't see. We had a peaceful life, Thomas and I. Not exciting, maybe, but safe. And for me, safety was everything. My parents, I never heard a word. Part of me assumed they were long dead. Another part, the part that still trembled at sudden noises, feared they weren't. I tried not to think about them. I built a wall around that part of my past, brick by painful brick. Then, about 30 years after I'd left, when I was nearly 50 myself, Thomas had already passed on from a sudden illness, and I was running the bakery on my own, getting on in years, or so I thought at the time. Little did I know I had another half-century ahead of me. A letter arrived. Official-looking envelope, with a lawyer's name embossed on it from a town I'd never heard of, miles away from my childhood home, but still in the same state. My hands trembled as I opened it. I had a feeling, a cold dread creeping up my spine. The letter was stark, formal. It informed Miss Clara Pendleton, and that name, after all those years, hit me like a punch to the gut, that her mother, Mrs. Eleanor Pendleton, had passed away. Passed away. My mother. A wave of something strange washed over me. Not grief, not exactly. More like a hollow ache, a sense of unfinished business. The letter went on to say that Mrs. Pendleton had left a small bequest for her daughter. A bequest? After all these years of silence? After she let me walk out that door into God knows what? It felt like a joke, a cruel cosmic prank. But that wasn't all. The lawyer stated that along with the modest sum of money, there was a locked wooden box. My mother's explicit instructions were that this box and its contents were to be delivered only to me, Clara Pendleton, and only upon her death. A locked box. What in God's name could be in that box? All those years, had she thought of me? Had she known I was alive? The questions swirled in my head like a blizzard. My quiet, predictable life in Havenwood suddenly felt fragile, like that wall I'd built was about to come tumbling down. The lawyer said he could arrange for the box and the funds to be sent to me, or I could travel to his office to collect them in person. Part of me wanted to tell him to throw the box in the river, to burn the money. What did I want with anything from her, from that life? But another part, that little girl still hiding inside me, the one who'd heard her mother crying and whispering. Secrets. That part was curious. Terribly, dangerously curious. What secrets did that box hold? Was this her way of finally speaking, now that she was beyond my father's reach? Or mine? You won't believe what she said next, or rather, what she'd left next. I knew, with a sinkin' feelin', that I had to find out. This wasn't just about a box. It was about that whisper in the dark. He must never know the truth about her. Was I finally going to find out what that truth was? Well, I tell you. That letter sat on my kitchen table for a week, like a time bomb ticking away. Every time I looked at it, my stomach did a little flip. A locked box from my mother, Eleanor. The woman whose silence had been a constant, deafening roar throughout my childhood. What could she possibly have to say to me now, from beyond the grave? Part of me was still that scared little girl, wanting to run and hide. But another part, the Lily May I'd become, the woman who'd survived and built a life from scratch. That part knew I couldn't just ignore it. For Pete's sake, this was maybe my only chance to understand. So, I wrote back to that lawyer, told him to send the box and the bequest. About 2 weeks later, a registered parcel arrived. Inside was a check for a sum that was, well, more than modest for someone like me back then. Enough to fix the leaky roof on the bakery and then some. And underneath the papers, there it was, the box. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a shoebox, made of dark, heavy wood, with a tarnished brass lock and no key. Just looking at it gave me the shivers. This box had been in her possession, probably for years, holding secrets she couldn't or wouldn't share while she was alive. I found a small hammer and a sturdy screwdriver. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold them steady. With a deep breath, I pried at the lock. It resisted for a moment. Then with a sickening crack of wood, the lid sprang open. For a minute, I just stared. It was filled with things. Old things. A faded baby bonnet, impossibly small. A tiny silver locket, tarnished with age. A few dried, pressed flowers that crumbled to dust when I touched them. And underneath it all, a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, and a slim, leather-bound diary. Her diary. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was her voice, finally. I picked up the diary first, the leather worn smooth with handling. The pages were brittle, filled with her spidery, old-fashioned handwriting. I sat down at my table, the afternoon sun slanting through the window of my little bakery kitchen, and I began to read. Lord have mercy, I whispered as the words on those pages started to paint a picture I'd never imagined. It started before she even married my father. She wrote of a young love, a gentle boy named James, a love that her parents, stern and unbending, had forbidden. They'd forced her to marry Arthur, a man older than her, a man they considered a good match because he had a bit of land and a respectable name. She wrote of her fear of Arthur, even before the wedding, his quick temper, his possessive nature. My mother, the silent, complicit woman I remembered, was a prisoner in her own life long before I came along. Then came the entries about me. She wrote about her joy when she found out she was pregnant, a tiny flicker of light in her dark world. But Arthur hadn't wanted children. He saw me as an intrusion, another mouth to feed, another being to compete for her attention. What little of it he allowed her to have for herself. The diary detailed his rages, his cruelty not just to me, but to her as well. She wrote of being too terrified to intervene when he turned on me, fearing he would only make it worse for both of us. She described nights spent weeping silently into her pillow, just like I'd heard her that one fateful night. She wrote, I see the hatred in his eyes when he looks at Clara. I see the fear in hers. What have I done, bringing a child into this hell? If I try to stop him, he'll kill us. Both. Or worse. It was a lot to take in. My mother? A victim too? It didn't excuse her silence, not entirely, but it changed the shape of it. It made it more tragic, less like cold indifference. But that wasn't the biggest shock. Oh no, not by a long shot. Tucked into the back of the diary, between the last written page and the leather cover, was a folded piece of official-looking paper. It was brittle, yellowed with age. I carefully unfolded it. It was a birth certificate. But it wasn't mine. The name on it was Eliza May Weatherby, born about 2 years before me. And the mother's name listed. Eleanor Weatherby, my mother's maiden name. Father's name? James Allen Cartwright, the gentle boy she'd loved. I swear on my grave, the room started to spin. My mother had another child? A child before me? A child with her first love? What happened to this Eliza May? The diary was strangely silent about her after a certain point, just before her marriage to Arthur. My head was buzzin'. Was this the her she'd been talking about that night? He can't know the truth about her. Was she talking about a hidden sister I never knew existed? I rummaged through the box again, my hands frantic now. The baby bonnet, the locket. Were these Eliza's? Then I found another small, folded piece of paper, tucked inside the locket itself, which I managed to pry open. It wasn't a birth certificate. It was a death certificate. Eliza May Cartwright died at 18 months. Cause of death: pneumonia. My breath caught in my throat. My mother had lost a child she'd loved, a child from a love she'd been forced to abandon. And she'd carried that grief, that secret, all those years, under the same roof as a man who would have destroyed her if he'd known. This changed everything. Her fear, her paralysis, her inability to protect me. It wasn't just about her own safety. She'd already lost one child. Was she so terrified of Arthur's wrath that she thought any intervention would lead to him getting rid of me too? The thought was horrifying. But then, another question surfaced, even more disturbing. If this Eliza was the her she was protecting, what did that make me in this whole tragic equation? I went back to the letters, the ones tied with the blue ribbon. They weren't from her first love, James. They were from Arthur, my father. But they were written to Eleanor, years before they were married, back when she was still supposed to be with James. And the tone of them. It wasn't loving. It was demanding, possessive, almost threatening. He knew about James. He wrote about dealing with James if she didn't agree to marry him. My blood ran cold. Was my father responsible for more than just abuse? Did he have something to do with why her first love, James, disappeared from her life so suddenly, as the diary hinted? And if so, what did that mean for my mother's choice to marry him? The more I uncovered, the less I understood, and the more horrifying the possibilities became. The diary had answered some questions, but it had opened up a Pandora's box of new ones. And the most chilling one of all began to form in my mind. If my mother was so desperate to protect Eliza's memory, and if Arthur was this monster, then who was my father, really? And what if Arthur wasn't my biological father at all? That was the last straw for my composure. I had to sit down before I fainted. Heavens to Betsy. My head was spinning like a top. My mother, Eleanor, had a secret child, Eliza, with her true love, James. This Eliza died young. And my father, Arthur, was a menacing figure even before they married, possibly threatening James. What incarnation was the full story here? The birth certificate for Eliza listed James Cartwright as the father, but what about my own birth certificate? I'd never seen it. Back in those days, such things weren't commonly displayed or discussed. Could it be that Arthur wasn't my biological father? Was that the truth about her? Meaning me, that my mother was so terrified he'd discover? That I wasn't his flesh and blood. But perhaps James's as well? Or someone else's entirely? The implications were staggering. If Arthur wasn't my father, then his cruelty, while still monstrous, took on a different, perhaps even more sinister light. Was he punishing me for not being his, or punishing my mother through me? The letters from Arthur to Eleanor before their marriage, they were chilling. He spoke of her duty and his expectations. There was one line that jumped out at me. "You will forget that farmer boy, Eleanor, or I will make you." And any reminders of him will be dealt with. Reminders. Could Eliza have been one such reminder he discovered too late? Or was he referring to something else? I had to know. That small bequest my mother left me. It was enough. I hired a private investigator, an old fella recommended by the lawyer who handled the estate. It felt strange, illicit almost, digging into my own parentage at my age. But I had to. I gave him all the names, the dates, the scraps of information from the diary and the box. I told him to find out everything he could about James Allen Cartwright, about Arthur Pendleton's early life, and, if possible, to find my own birth certificate. It took weeks, felt like an eternity. The investigator, Mr. Davies, was thorough. He uncovered land deeds, old newspaper clippings, even tracked down distant cousins of the Cartwright family. And then he called me. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice grave. "I think you should sit down. I have your birth certificate, and I found out what happened to James Cartwright." My heart was in my throat. He came to my bakery, laid the papers out on my kitchen table, right where I'd opened my mother's box. There it was, my birth certificate. Clara Pendleton. Mother, Eleanor Pendleton, formerly Weatherby. Father, Arthur Pendleton. My stomach sank. So he was my father. That hope, that tiny, desperate hope that I wasn't truly his, vanished. But then, Mr. Davies slid another document across the table. It was a marriage certificate for Eleanor Weatherby and James Cartwright, dated nearly 3 years before her marriage to Arthur. They had been secretly married. Eliza May was their legitimate child, and James? Mr. Davies found a brief, faded newspaper article from an old county gazette. Local farmer missing, presumed drowned. James Cartwright. His wagon had been found overturned near the river, a few months after Eliza was born, and shortly before, Eleanor was suddenly and very publicly engaged to Arthur Pendleton. No body was ever recovered. Presumed drowned. But the article mentioned whispers, local gossip of foul play. Arthur Pendleton's name wasn't mentioned, but the timing. It was too coincidental. Mr. Davies then showed me something else. Financial records. Arthur, it turned out, had systematically taken control of my mother's family farm after their marriage, a farm that should have belonged to her and James. He'd been after her inheritance all along. James was an obstacle. My mother, a young widow, with a baby, Eliza, and now pregnant with me, because the dates confirmed I was indeed conceived shortly after James's accident and her forced marriage to Arthur, was trapped. Utterly and completely trapped. Arthur probably suspected I wasn't his. Or at least he knew I was the daughter of the woman he'd essentially blackmailed and coerced into marriage after her true husband's convenient disappearance. The truth about her that my mother whispered about. It wasn't just about Eliza's existence. It was about everything. The secret marriage, James's suspicious death, Arthur's probable involvement, the fact that my mother had been forced into a life of terror with the man who likely murdered her, husband, and me. I was the living embodiment of her nightmare, a constant reminder of her lost love and her horrifying present. No wonder she was terrified of what Arthur might do if he ever confirmed his suspicions about my parentage, or if the full extent of his crimes came to light. Her silence, her inaction, wasn't born of indifference. It was born of absolute, soul-crushing terror. For her life and for mine. She was protecting me in the only way she knew how. By enduring. By being invisible. By ensuring Arthur never had a reason to dig deeper, and the money she left me? Mr. Davies found that too. Over the years, Eleanor had secretly, painstakingly, sold off small family heirlooms, bits of jewelry, things Arthur wouldn't notice, and squirreled away the money. Not just for me, but she'd also been sending anonymous donations to an orphanage in a nearby county for years, perhaps her way of honoring Eliza's memory. The final sum she left me. It was her last act of defiance, her last gift of freedom. I sat there, the story of my life laid bare, and I wept. Not for the abuse, not for the fear, but for my mother, for the life she'd lost, for the choices she never had, for the incredible, terrible burden she'd carried alone for so many years. I finally understood. It didn't erase the pain of my childhood, but it reframed it. My mother wasn't my tormentor's accomplice. She was his primary victim, fighting a silent, desperate war to keep us both alive. In the end, there was no grand confrontation with Arthur. He died some years after my mother, a bitter, lonely, old man according to Mr. Davies. The reconciliation was with my mother's memory. I took some of the money she left me and bought a small, simple headstone for her grave, and one for Eliza May Cartwright, placing it beside her mother. I even found the old unmarked cemetery where James was likely laid to rest by his family after the accident, and placed flowers there. It was a quiet peace, a settling of old ghosts. I'm 104 now. I've outlived them all. The bakery is run by a nice young woman I mentored. I sit on my porch, watch the world go by, and I think about Eleanor, and I forgive her. More than that, I admire her strength. A strength I never saw when I was a child, because it was so deeply hidden. She did what she had to do, in a time when women had so few choices. She survived. And because she survived, I survived. And that, my dears, is a legacy of its own. What a journey, eh? From a terrified girl to a centenarian with a story that could fill a book. It just goes to show, you never really know what battles people are fighting beneath the surface. So, what do you think? It's a heavy story, I know. Would you have been able to forgive, knowing what she went through? Or do you think the scars of childhood are too deep? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you would have sought out the truth like I did, or if some stones are best left unturned. And if you've made it this far, bless your patient heart. If you enjoy these kinds of real-life dramas, these journeys through the human spirit, please give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories from a life that's seen it all. Click that little bell icon too so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for listening to an old woman ramble. It means more than you know.